In 1981, in a hotel room in Los Angeles, Tina Turner fell to her knees on the floor, her face bruised and swollen, her whole body aching after a violent beating. On the table were only a few loose coins and a credit card about to be declined. The woman who had once sold out stadiums didn't even have enough money to pay for the room. That night, she didn't sign a contract, didn't sing another song. She made only one decision: either leave everything behind or die in silence. Few people knew that behind the voice that could tear through the air was a life repeatedly shattered. Tina did not step onto the stage through glamour, but through wounds that had never fully healed. Her talent was too great to deny, yet that very talent was bound inside a controlling marriage where violence and fame existed side by side. Every round of applause was a layer of concealment, every glittering dress a way to hide the fear of what waited behind the curtain. When everything collapsed, Tina Turner faced the cruelest paradox of all: a legend erased, forced to start over from nothing at an age when others had already stepped away. No band, no rights, no past to lean on, only her voice and her will to survive. From those ashes, a rebirth unlike any in music history began to take shape. So what gave a woman crushed by her own glory the strength to rise again, stronger than ever before? Before there was a stage, Anna Mae Bullock grew up in Nutbush, Tennessee, a small agricultural community where days were divided by labor and seasons, not by the rhythm of childhood. Life revolved around fields, manual work, and long stretches of sameness. Scarcity did not need to be named there. It showed itself in daily routines, in helping from an early age, in the feeling that everything had to continue, whether one was tired or not. Her family did not provide a stable space to lean on. Her parents separated when she was young. Departures happened without clear rituals of goodbye. For a period, Anna Mae lived with her grandmother, away from her parents' home in a movement never fully explained to a child. Being moved, being placed into spaces she did not choose, became a familiar part of life, not like a dramatic event, yes, but like a condition of existence. In that setting, the Baptist church was one of the few places where Anna Mae's voice could rise without being cut off by work or obligation. There, singing was not performance. It was tied to breath, to bodily rhythm, to pushing air until sound broke free. Technique was not trained first. Force was. A way of using the whole body to create a voice in a space that allowed release. Poverty did not appear as theatrical tragedy. It existed as a series of narrow choices, few options, few pauses. Continuing on, continuing to work, continuing to adapt became reflex. In that environment, leaving Nutbush was not a clearly formed artistic dream. It was more like a movement in search of another space to exist, even without knowing exactly where she would stand. When Anna Mae arrived in St. Louis, she carried no career plan. She carried her voice, endurance, and the habit of standing firm in spaces that did not belong to her. Those skills were not formed for the stage. They were formed for survival. And from that foundation, she stepped into her first musical spaces, not as someone with the power to choose, but as someone used to adapting in order to remain. In St. Louis, Anna Mae Bullock appeared in clubs as a voice called up when a band needed to fill a gap. Tight rooms, low stages, loud bands. When she sang, the music behind her had to make way, not because technique was on display, but because volume, breath, and force made the band adjust so her voice would not be swallowed. Listeners turned. The band remembered. Ike Turner stood at the center of the Kings of Rhythm. He held the bookings, the studio, the order within the band. When Anna Mae entered that circuit, she was not introduced as a new star. She was placed into the machine. Rehearse, perform, wait for her turn at the microphone. Rehearsals ran long. Nights of shows followed one another. Some nights her voice grew hoarse before the set ended, but the schedule did not change. The microphone was wiped. The music started again. The body had to keep time, even when the throat was already strained. In 1960, in the studio, "A Fool in Love" was recorded as a placeholder for another singer. When the tape rolled, Anna Mae's voice filled the space completely. The record was released under a new name, Tina Turner. The renaming happened quickly, cleanly, decisively. A name attached to a voice, bringing with it image, introduction, and control. From that moment, Tina Turner began appearing on marquees, record sleeves, and in the band's announcements. The Ike and Tina Turner Revue formed like a performance machine, a dense schedule, stage after stage. Tina became the main draw, stepping forward, holding the tempo, keeping the room in tension. Movement, voice, endurance were pushed to the center of the show. Some nights, thigh muscles tightened after the choreography, yet the later numbers still had to keep pace. There was no room to slow down. Behind the stage, the operational order did not change. Schedules were set, studio time arranged, major decisions passed through a single point. The early years of the Revue were measured more by the number of nights on stage than by chart positions. Tour buses left parking lots before dawn and arrived in the next city, with the schedule already pressed tight against showtime. Dressing rooms were narrow, lit by white bulbs, the smell of sweat and hairspray mixing in the air. Stage dresses were hung up still damp, only to be worn again. Some mornings, her voice needed longer warm-ups to reach full strength, but the bus did not wait. On stage, Tina held the center through movement before reputation. Fast footwork, sharp turns, a voice cutting through the band, high drum tempos, precise gestures. The voice pushed close to the body's limits. Shows ended in cheers, then lights cut quickly. Wings were cramped. Rest time was short. The engine started again, and the Ikettes appeared as an inseparable part of the performance structure. They were transitional rhythm, a moving block that kept the room in sustained tension. Wigs, short dresses, high heels, synchronized steps creating a visual front for the endurance of the whole troupe. Backstage meant long rehearsal hours, corrections, repetition, until every movement reached the sharpness needed not to be swallowed by the band. Reputation spread the way live stage fame does, by word of mouth, by rooms already heated, by promoters who knew that the name guaranteed a restless night. But the machine was not freed from the schedule. It kept running on the body of the one at the center. Tina learned to hold tempo with breath, thigh muscles, throat, and the ability to step out on time, even when the night before had ended very late. In 1966, Tina entered a studio unlike any working space before. Phil Spector built a massive ensemble, layers of sound stacked into a dense wall. At the microphone, Tina did not stand like a singer searching for color. She stood like a body required to cut through that mass with force. Each take meant pushing breath, holding rhythm, maintaining pitch inside a structure that allowed no drop. The studio had no audience, no stage movement to shield her. Only the voice and the pressure to sustain intensity. Ike was not present at those sessions. Studio control lay elsewhere. Tina stood alone before the orchestra, recording take after take. The long sessions were not for softness. They were to keep the voice at the tension needed not to be swallowed by drums, strings, and horns. They river deep, mountain high, became a record where the voice was placed inside density, each phrase held by the whole body. The way Tina sang here differed from familiar stage R and B phrasing. It was a voice held at high intensity across the entire track. When the record emerged, reactions in Britain and Europe showed Tina's voice could stand independently inside a large structure, not only as the center of a touring band. European stages received her as a powerful presence whose voice didn't need the revue's image to generate force. In the United States, the song didn't open radio doors as expected. There, Tina remained held within the revue's familiar stage circuit. The consequences appeared in Tina's workload. International routes grew denser, performance spaces expanded. On stage, the body remained the main instrument. In the studio, the voice had proven it could stand inside larger structures. Tina did not change position within the revue, but the way her voice was regarded began to shift, especially in markets outside the familiar touring system. From 1969, the Ike and Tina Turner Revue moved into spaces where stages were no longer intimate enough to hold everything through detail. Opening for the Rolling Stones placed Tina in arenas and stadiums where the back rows saw only movement and heard a voice projected through massive systems. Steps had to be wider, turns higher. Stage command no longer relied on eye contact or proximity, but on intensity. The body was required to magnify itself to fit the scale. In those spaces, schedules were no longer flexible. A large venue allowed no delay. A major show allowed no drop in energy. Tina had to sustain enough power for the entire space to remain charged until the final minute. As stages expanded, demands on the body expanded with them. Scale did not just change the audience, it changed how Tina had to exist on stage. In 1971, Proud Mary was placed near the end of the show's structure. The record reached number 4 on the Billboard Hot 100 and earned a Grammy, making the number indispensable on every tour. On stage, the slow opening was stretched to draw the room closer. When the tempo shifted, movement widened, speed rose, breath pushed higher to match the pace. In large arenas, that transition was often when the entire space stood up. From that point, Proud Mary was no longer just a song in the set list. It became the moment every show built toward, the moment Tina's endurance stood before tens of thousands. On tour, this number brought clear consequences. The show's structure had to be calculated to conserve energy for the finale. Schedules had to ensure Tina still had strength for the explosion. As stage space widened, demands on the body tightened. Each night, the tempo shift in Proud Mary became the point where the entire audience and the whole touring machine converged, where voice, movement, and endurance were placed in the same test, repeated with no room to falter. In 1973, Nutbush City Limits entered the set list with a faster tempo and a structure suited for large stages. The song became a hit in the UK and across many European markets, expanding the revue's touring routes beyond the United States. On stage, the brisk pace demanded denser movement and longer stretches of sustained energy. There were no buffer sections between parts. The number required the body to hold speed from the start, with no slow segment to conserve strength. European tours in this period increased travel intensity. Distances between cities shortened. Recovery time between shows tightened. Nutbush City Limits often opened the show's momentum early, pushing energy up front and forcing the entire performance structure to be recalculated so the body would not drop later. Venues changed, schedules shifted, but the demand to maintain the same tension on stage did not. In arenas outside the US, this number was often used to gauge audience response. Fast tempo, dense movement, wide space. If the crowd kept pace, the show held its force. If not, the entire night's intensity was affected. In that way, Nutbush City Limits was not just a song. It became a segment around which tour schedules and show structures revolved, placing Tina's body into a faster and harsher operating rhythm inside ever larger spaces. The schedule remained dense. Revenue lived on stage. The lineup was kept stable to protect the show's structure. The center did not change. Tina Turner. Each night, the same intensity standard was set, regardless of distance traveled, consecutive nights, or physical condition. Bigger stages required larger movement. Faster tempos meant shorter recovery windows. Numbers were arranged to preserve force, not to allow drops. The body had to learn to sustain tension continuously, not just within one song, but across the entire show. When one night ended, the next was already set. There was no space to reduce tempo. Only the demand to maintain the same level of presence, the same body, the same standard, repeated, on stages growing wider, where any dip showed immediately before thousands. In 1974, Tina entered the studio to record Tina Turns, The Country On. During rare gaps between tour legs, there was no wide stage space to build momentum. The studio required steadiness across multiple takes, control of force rather than full release. Sessions often came after performance nights. The body still carried tour rhythm, but headphones were already on. The voice had to change its use. Smaller space, different pressure. The album did not alter the tour schedule. It slipped between trips like a second layer of labor placed on the same body. The review continued on its old structure, the schedule printed in advance. The bus arrived on time. Familiar dressing rooms, stage dresses, high heels, wraps, towels. Each night, the same sequence. Opening, peak, finale. When the lights went out, costumes were hung up. Before sitting down, someone knocked to call bus time. The next city was already on the route. There was no space to adjust tempo, no room to cut intensity. Experiments outside the review did not create a new center. They existed as interspersed sessions, longer workdays. One side was the studio needing control, the other, the stage demanding explosion. Two labor modes placed on the same body, save strength for stage, save voice for studio. No long enough pause to shift states. On subsequent tours, the gap between the two rhythms began to show in small details. Shorter change times, compressed recovery between numbers, rehearsals held before the body had fully recovered. The stage kept the same structure, but the work behind the wings grew heavier. Tasks unseen by the audience were packed into narrow spaces between shows. By 1976, the schedule was still running. Shows still started on time. But between stage rhythm and life rhythm, a misalignment began to show. The issue was no longer the ability to stand on stage, but having to keep standing there while control did not belong to the person at the center of the lights. The machine still operated. For Tina, maintaining that pace was no longer something that could stretch on as before. That summer, the tour continued according to the printed itinerary. Hotels and lobbies, waiting cars, dressing rooms, familiar sequences repeating. At one stop, Tina walked out of a hotel room in silence. A long hallway, yellow lights, a slow elevator descent. No stage lights, no one calling her name. The corridor had no audience, no spotlight. Just carpet, yellow bulbs, an elevator moving slowly downward. In the lobby, the front desk glowed. A clerk looked up, then back down. No one addressed her. Tina stepped outside with a bag in hand, passed through glass doors into the steady flow of street traffic. What she kept was not property, not contracts, not tour schedules. What went with her was the stage name Tina Turner, a name not packed in a suitcase, but enough to continue standing on stage. The band, the tour structure, the revenue flow, control, all remained behind the door that had just closed. The days that followed unfolded in temporary spaces, sofas in friends' homes, living rooms where she set her bag against the wall, a few outfits on hangers, a landline phone near a window, show dates written by hand. Engagements no longer followed routes, but scattered points on a map. Casinos, clubs, small stages where her name no longer filled the marquee. In those rooms, stage and daily life were not separate. Dining tables sat near the stage edge. The sound of cutlery hitting glasses rang between songs. Then audiences ate dinner while listening. The distance between the front row and stage lip was only a few steps. Tina stood close enough to see eyes, close enough to hear breathing. Focus was no longer lifted by scale. It had to be held by the body's intensity alone. There was no comeback narrative in such nights. Only the act of keeping the name being called, on small marquees, in rooms not built to make legends. One voice, one body, a schedule rebuilt night by night. The name Tina Turner still existed. The place for that name to attach had to be recreated in narrow spaces, one stage at a time. Work was pieced together. One night at a casino, a weekend at a club, an opening slot for another artist. No strings of consecutive nights in the same city. The map was full of isolated points. Each show stood alone, not forming a current strong enough to pull industry attention back. In studios, Tina kept recording. Rough in 1978. Love Explosion in 1979. Sessions took place under conditions where they were no longer the central investment, no major campaigns attached, no long promotional schedules. These recordings appeared more as efforts to keep the name present in the market than as projects positioned to redefine her. The studio was no longer where the future was set, but where existence was kept in motion. In March 1979, Love Explosion was released, not creating a pivot, but enough to keep the name Tina Turner within release calendars. Professional life became temporary. Short flights, constantly changing hotel rooms, no large entourage, no one calling with long route schedules. Each contract negotiated separately. Each show required to prove its worth on its own, not elevated by an existing structure. Some nights, Tina stood as the opening act, her name placed above in smaller type. Audiences came for the headliner, set time reduced. The explosive moment had to be compressed into a shorter slot, but the body still had to maintain the standard. There was no allowance to reduce force because the poster position had changed. The name Tina Turner was still called, but its place on the marquee had shifted. Smaller letters, shorter time, opening role. The presence did not vanish, it contracted, and had to justify itself within each brief window. On such nights, presence did not disappear. It tightened. It survived in spaces where the industry no longer granted center stage, yet still enough for a body to keep standing, to keep time, one show at a time. Changes did not begin in large auditoriums. They began in the studio, in how the voice was placed. Under Roger Davies's guidance, recording sessions moved at a different pace. At times, Tina was asked to hold back force in the opening lines. At times, takes were cut when the rasp pushed too soon. Some tracks were kept at lower intensity, allowing breath and grain to remain audible, letting traces of fatigue stay uncorrected. The voice was no longer forced to conquer space. It was allowed to exist within it. In late 1983, the cover of Let's Stay Together was released in the UK and entered the top 10. The first time in many years that her voice was placed back into a different listening condition, aligned with the way Roger Davies had been restructuring the studio environment. In May 1984, Private Dancer was released. The album was not built as a replica of the review. It was built as a place where the voice could stand alone. The recordings held energy without forcing explosion. The sonic space opened for a different image, a woman who had passed through too many stages, carrying in her voice the marks of time, allowing them to surface directly without cover. In September 1984, What's Love Got to Do With It reached #1 on the Billboard Hot 100. The song did not rely on the familiar weight of stage power. Moderate tempo, space for vocal storytelling, a presence that did not need to strain to occupy the room. Its chart success came not from intensity, but from allowing Tina's voice to exist in another form, more mature, less demonstrative, and yet enough to hold the center of listening in a shifting market. In early 1985, the Grammy Awards called Tina's name 3 times in one night. Lights, the podium, a succession of handshakes. More than trophies, it marked the moment when a voice once held within an older structure entered the mainstream flow of contemporary pop and rock. The name Tina Turner was no longer tied to a shared past on posters. It stood alone on billboards, broadcast schedules, and charts tracked weekly by the industry. What mattered was not the number of years lived. It was how the voice was heard again, no longer forced to strain to fill stage space every night. On record, the rasp, fatigue, held breaths were left exposed. The past was not hidden. It entered the tone directly. Lines were sustained longer. Silence between beats became part of the voice, not something to be filled. Work environments expanded into other conditions. Some days began on film sets, under harsh lights, sand, smoke, marked floors guiding where the body had to move. Motion no longer served singing rhythm. It served the frame. The body had to learn another mode of presence, where light was not for the voice, but for the image. Within that structure, Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome placed Tina in a new labor space. Not stage, not studio. A place where each step, camera angle, and still moment was measured visually. "We don't need another hero" sounded in that world like a voice standing among smoke, sand, and lights, where audiences did not come for review history, but for a presence that had entered the center of 1980s popular culture. The next work rhythm returned to the studio with different demands. Recordings had to withstand stadiums, bigger drums, wider frequency ranges, the voice positioned so it would not be swallowed through massive sound systems. In rehearsals, the aim was not only pitch accuracy, but sustaining force across large space. When Break Every Rule was released, tour structure opened on a new scale. Extended sound checks, multiple lighting tests, gaps between check and show long enough for the body to cool, then needing to be brought back to the correct level before stepping into light. Each concert became a calibration between voice, movement, and spatial resonance. In the years that followed, performance spaces expanded across Europe and South America. Stadiums replaced theaters. Equipment trucks lined up behind venues. Stage build hours stretched long. The body entered spaces where individual faces could not be seen, only the movement rhythm of a mass audience. At Maracanã, the stands were filled. Sound bounced back from high concrete rings, forcing the voice to travel farther, higher, to reach upper tiers. Movement could not be small, and each step had to be wide enough not to be swallowed by distance. In that space, Tina did not hold the stage through detail. She held it through the total force of the body, through a pulse that made the entire crowd move in one direction. In such environments, in-ear monitors, audio delay, and lighting timing became part of singing itself. The voice traveled not only through the throat, but through systems, and the body had to learn to stand in time with machines. Toward the end of the decade, new songs were placed into the show structure as pacing anchors. The best often sat at the point where the body required a different kind of energy, less compressed force, more steadiness. Audiences waited for that section not for an explosion, but to hold a shared pulse together. In these years, change showed in how each night was built. Equipment trucks increased, stage build times lengthened, distances between cities shortened. Tina stepped into spaces engineered for heavy load, where everything, from lighting to sound, was designed for massive crowds. No declaration was needed. Continuing to stand there, to sing, to hold rhythm in those spaces spoke for itself. Mornings on film sets started early. Call times posted, lights rigged, marks taped on the floor. Tina entered a work rhythm where life story no longer stayed behind the curtain, but became scenes, dialogue, frames repeated take after take. In 1993, What's Love Got to Do with It led to another cycle of labor. Press schedules, interviews back-to-back, repeated questions, headlines placing private life beside career. What had once been kept off stage now operated under lights, cameras, and a dense media timetable. Not behind, but at the center of the machine. 2 years later, studio and screen shifted labor structures again. GoldenEye placed Tina's voice inside the workflow of a global film franchise, recording for the opening sequence, timing vocals to images, cutting takes by frame, not by performance rhythm. The song did not need a stage to exist. It lived in cinemas, in credits, in international broadcasts. The voice moved ahead of the body, image moved ahead of stage. Alongside film and studio, touring did not shrink. It expanded. Arenas, stadiums, stage builds began days before shows. Equipment trucks lined up. Sound checks ran long. Stage times locked to sponsorship and broadcast contracts. Each night's space grew larger. The walk from wings to center stage lengthened. As space widened, light had to project farther. Movement had to enlarge to hold rhythm in rooms no longer intimate. And during these years, the name Tina Turner appeared consistently on tour revenue charts, not as a rare event, but as a steady operating rhythm. City after city, calendars filled, days off scarce, night flights, mornings in new time zones. The touring machine did not need naming to prove its status. It showed in the number of build days, in the length of routes, in the requirement to maintain the same intensity standard before ever larger audiences. In 2000, the Super Bowl placed Tina in a compressed stage structure. Short duration, cameras everywhere, lighting designed for broadcast, not the length of a full concert. No long warm-up, no gradual build of momentum. Within minutes, the body had to enter full intensity, hold the frame, hold force for millions watching on screens. Another form of labor. Little time, many viewing angles, any misstep immediately visible live. In the years after, schedules were no longer built as long chains. Contracts appeared more sporadically. Each return required weeks of preparation, retraining, rebuilding, adjusting the body to large-scale intensity after long pauses. No longer did one city flow straight into the next for weeks on end. Between appearances, gaps on the calendar widened. More days without sound checks than with them. At the 2008 to 2009 anniversary tour was built as a composite structure. Familiar songs were placed back into the show. Sections audiences had waited decades for remained in position. Each night carried two loads: performance force and the weight of audience memory. Logistics were still large: trucks, rigging, lighting. But consecutive nights were no longer as dense. Between legs, rest periods lengthened to allow the body to recover. In later shows, structure was calculated to complete the night without burning out. Explosive sections were kept, but the middle was opened. Tempo divided into smaller segments. No longer was the goal to stretch long chains of consecutive nights. Each appearance became a measured expenditure of force, not part of a continuous running cycle. After this tour, large touring routes were no longer constructed, no more months-long schedules. Familiar trucks no longer waited along fixed paths. Extended stage builds no longer appeared with the same steady rhythm. On the calendar, blank spaces outnumbered performance markers. Appearances were isolated, not forming chains. There was no loud closing curtain. Only the machine that once sustained stage life was no longer assembled, and the empty spaces on the calendar spoke for the gradual close. And as that labor rhythm receded from the center, another part of the story came into clearer view. Tina's relationship with Ike Turner did not begin as a love story. It formed in a space where power and opportunity sat in the same hands. Ike brought Tina onto the professional stage. He also held the band, the contracts, the money, and much of the decision-making power in private life. Work and marriage were not separate. They overlapped within the same structure. In that structure, the husband was also the manager. The person directing the career was the one holding authority in personal life. Saying no was not simply rejecting a relationship. It meant losing the entire professional world Tina stood inside: the stage, the band, the income, and even the right to continue appearing. Their house was not merely a home. It was where the review operated, where Ikettes were recruited, where schedules were arranged, where newcomers saw Tina not only as a singer, but as the center of an established machine. In that space, the boundary between private life and performance life blurred. What happened in the family did not stop in bedrooms or living rooms. It spread into how the band functioned, how power was held, how fear was maintained. Tina has publicly confirmed many times that violence was a sustained part of the marriage. Not a single incident, not a short phase. These were years in which the body endured two forms of pressure at once, on stage and behind closed doors. The same body required to explode before audiences was the body carrying wounds in private life. Some nights, lights came up as usual. Music started. Movements had to remain precise. But what had just happened backstage could not follow onto the stage. Audiences did not see. The schedule did not stop. No showtime was moved because of the lead singer's private life. In that relationship, violence was not only physical, it was tied to financial control and decision-making power. Money earned from the stage was not in Tina's hands. Contracts, revenue, ownership were held elsewhere. This created a form of dependence not easily cut. Thinking about leaving was not only ending a marriage, it meant stepping out of the entire machine that had created fame, income, and professional existence. For many years, Tina lived inside a prolonged paradox. The greater the stage success, the heavier the cost in private life. Fame did not bring safety. It made leaving more dangerous because everything, from band to money, was tied to one person. In that context, silence was not only endurance, it became a condition for continuing to exist in the world Tina inhabited. When the marriage ended, the break did not resemble victory. Tina did not leave with assets. She did not retain most of what she had built. What she kept was the stage name Tina Turner. The name became the only thing that remained hers. Not as a memory, but as a survival tool. Something enough to continue standing on stage, to continue being called, to continue existing in the industry when everything else had been left behind. Keeping the name was not only legal, it was identity. After years of being defined by others, retaining her name became the only way to say she was still there, not as a wife, not as property of a band, but as a person with the right to continue shaping her own life. During the marriage, Tina had biological and adopted children. Family life existed within a rhythm dictated by tour schedules, flights, hotels, and nights away. Motherhood unfolded in the gaps between tours. In later years, as her career entered another chapter, the greatest losses were no longer tied to the stage. In 2018, her son Craig died, a blow arriving late, without lights, without an audience, without any way to turn into performance narrative. In 2022, her son Ronnie also passed. These losses could not be processed through stage discipline or work schedules. They did not fit the rhythm Tina had learned to endure. These were griefs with no place to hide, no wings, no showtime to delay emotion, only private life facing emptiness directly. In her later years, another relationship appeared with a different logic. Erwin Bach did not enter as a career controller. He did not stand in the position of deciding work, money, or tour schedules. They met in the 1980s, but married only in 2013. Life shifted to Switzerland. No longer at the center of the American entertainment industry, no longer in the chain of touring machinery, a private life was no longer fused to a performance machine. In this relationship, power was not defined through work. It showed in life choices. When Tina faced kidney failure in 2017, Erwin Bach donated a kidney to her. No stage, no live broadcast, no audience watching. Only a life or death decision taking place in a medical space, where the body was no longer a performance tool, but the condition for continued existence. Here, love was not measured through public images. It was measured by who remained when the lights went out, when tour schedules ended, when the body could no longer bear previous strain. After a life marked by control, exploitation, and limited choice, living in a relationship where presence was not tied to professional power carried another meaning, not triumph, but a late form of calm. This part of life does not erase what came before. It does not lighten the years of abuse, control, or enforced silence. But it places beside that history another image. A woman no longer required to prove herself through endurance, no longer required to stay silent to survive, no longer paying with her body to hold position. After loss, betrayal, and years of taken control, and this was one of the few places in Tina Turner's life where the lights no longer determined the value of her presence. In Küsnacht, life was no longer measured by tour schedules. The house looked over the lake. Mornings did not begin with show calls. The calendar was marked by medical appointments, by the body's rhythm, not by the stages. The years that followed were first marked by kidney failure. Medical appointments entered the calendar as fixed points. Daily rhythm was measured by what the body could endure, not by distance between cities. Then a stroke slowed that rhythm further. Cancer treatments narrowed living space to clinics, waiting rooms, and days arranged around remaining strength. Long trips grew rare. Public appearances became sparse, selective, and increasingly infrequent. In 2021, the documentary Tina appeared on HBO. The camera did not follow tour schedules. It followed memory, archival footage, a voice placed back into a space she chose. A rare moment when the story was not shaped by touring, record labels, or promotion cycles, but by a narrative rhythm Tina controlled. Her final days did not unfold in public space. No stage, no backstage, no press room. On May 23, 2023, Tina died at home in Küsnacht at age 83. On the calendar, there were no more dates marked for preparation for a new appearance. Only days passing in another rhythm, slower, private, no longer arranged for lights. The numbers are not only on album covers, they appear in award schedules, in the repeated calling of her name in crowded rooms, in evenings where old songs are placed into new structures. More than 8 Grammy appearances were not only moments of recognition, they signaled a voice kept in long-term circulation by the system. In 1991, that name entered the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame with Ike and Tina, a chapter recorded within the structure of a group and era. 30 years later, in 2021, the same name returned, this time alone. 2 inductions, two different structures. Not as a repeated honor, but as two ways the system acknowledged the same person under different conditions of existence. Global tours left traces not only in venues. They appear in revenue, in numbers of cities, in records noted after audiences left. These mark a body and a voice capable of sustaining market force over long spans, not in short cycles, but across decades. Influence does not show as slogans. It appears in how female singers later place their voices in rock, pop, and soul. In intensity no longer seen as male privilege. In how a body can stand on a vast stage without softening age, without diluting the weight of experience. This story does not close with a final achievement. It closes with a set of conditions held long enough to become precedent. A woman leaving a violent system without assets, keeping her name, rebuilding an entire professional structure at an age the industry often considers past peak, returning her voice to the center after everything had been taken. What remains is not only in songs or old lights, it is in a body that learned to rise many times within one life. In stages, rebuilt from nothing. In the ability to keep time after rhythm seemed gone, not as a triumph narrative, as a lived reality, sustained long enough, large enough, that the spaces that followed had to account for it.